This is Charles Ebune, and this is a very special edition of GlobeWatch, brought to you today from one of the halls of the nation's leading conference center here in Yaoundé, Cameroon. The search for peace, combating human trafficking, environmental protection, and the promotion of human rights and democracy are some of the issues facing our world today that our global leaders must handle. Getting a definite solution to such challenges remains a major task because we live in a multipolar world where the key actors are so many. And one of the actors is the United States of America. So where does Washington stand on some of the key issues facing our world today in the last days of the Barack Obama administration? My guest today is a former colleague who, up to 2002, was the founding executive director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at Kennedy School at Harvard University. She was a senior foreign policy advisor to Senator and later candidate Barack Obama before becoming special assistant to President Barack Obama at the National Security Council before heading to the newly created Atrocities Prevention Board at the National Security Council. A product of Irish and American schools, Samantha Power is my guest today and happens to be a senior journalist covering wars in the ex-Yugoslavia. And she is an award-winning personality considered one of the most powerful ladies in the world, serving currently as the 28th ambassador of the United States of America to the United Nations Organization, established in 1945. U.S. UN Ambassador Samantha Jane Power, welcome to GlobeWatch.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Let me start with a fundamental question. You are the first sitting cabinet-level member of the Obama administration and probably the most senior American government official to ever land in Cameroon. Explain to me what takes you from your comfortable office at the UN Plaza in New York to be found in Yaoundé today.
Thank you. That's a great question. I think the proximate cause is the threat posed by Boko Haram, the increased vulnerability faced by the Cameroonian people, particularly in the north, and our desire to offer more support to you and the Cameroonian government as they try to formulate an effective response against Boko Haram. But beyond that, now having visited Cameroon, I'm very interested in Cameroon's democracy, in its civil society, and in the steps that can be taken to strengthen Cameroon's institutions. You know, it's extremely important that countries, even where people can vote or when they can open a social media account, that they know that there are checks and balances across the country, not just in the capital, but also in some of the more rural and remote areas. And so I'm also now very deeply invested in Cameroon's success, irrespective of when we defeat Boko Haram. I now consider myself a friend of Cameroon for life.
You just mentioned Boko Haram in your opening comments. We already know that the American government has deployed some 300 military personnel on the request of Mr. Biya, the President of the Republic, whom you met at the Unity Palace, the White House of Cameroon. We equally know that the US government had provided previously some $40 million, that should be 22 billion CFA francs in financial aid. What are you bringing new to show further American engagement in eliminating Boko Haram?
Well, we today made an announcement of an additional $40 million in humanitarian assistance, a contribution that, having been to the north yesterday and seeing how the people are suffering, particularly Cameroonian displaced, 150 to 170,000 Cameroonian displaced persons, living in borrowed homes and struggling to pay rent, having lost their livelihoods, too afraid to go back to the land that they used to be able to plant. So this humanitarian assistance will go for the countries of the Lake Chad Basin, and Cameroon will be an essential beneficiary of that. But we also are here with some very senior military general and a very senior military civilian. And part of what we are trying to think through is what is the next phase of the fight, the military fight against Boko Haram, and what intelligence support is needed in order to effectively contribute to that. So I think you will see America's assistance to Cameroon evolving. It has taken some time, unfortunately, for the countries of the region to coordinate their efforts, and I think finally now, through the multinational joint task force in N'Djamena, and stepped up, increased bilateral contacts, for instance, between President Buhari of Nigeria and President Biya here, as one example. You're seeing more coordination, more of a team effort, and so I think now U.S. assistance is also going to be more effective because it will reinforce efforts themselves that are more coordinated and less counterproductive than some of them were in the early stages of fighting Boko Haram.
You just spoke about the multinational joint task force to combat Boko Haram. It is comprised of about 8,700 military and civilian personnel working hand in hand. But at one time there was talk of a United Nations resolution to impede the actions of Boko Haram, and there was talk of an international conference of donors to provide further assistance to the affected countries with over 7 million people today stressed because of Boko Haram. Where are all those actions today? In a limbo?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the fact that you have the first U.S. cabinet official here in a very long time, 25 years at least, is a reflection of our increased investment and involvement. And I'm very blessed because I get to go back to the United States, both in my capacity as U.S. ambassador to the UN, and to sit down with my Nigerian and Nigerian and Chadian and Cameroonian counterparts and think, okay, here's what I saw, here's what we're doing collectively, now what can we do at the United Nations? What is the right next step? But I also get to go to Washington, where I'm a member of the President's cabinet, and sit down with the head of our military, with Secretary John Kerry, with the President's National Security Advisor, with the head of the intelligence community, Susan Rice, and talk through, okay, how do we, like I said, how do we take this effort to the next level? I do want to stress, though, that both in the United States and I think here, when the question is asked, what are you doing to fight Boko Haram? The expected answer for people who really care a lot is usually something in the strict security sphere. And what we have learned the hard way recently through fighting ISIL, and before that through trying to combat Al-Qaeda in places like Afghanistan, is that if you just focus on the military and you neglect political grievances, or you don't ensure that there's money for reconstruction to rebuild people's homes, or you slight education, perhaps the foundational right among them all, you're going to be dealing with the symptoms of a problem and not the root causes. And so I think your question is especially pertinent because it would be a mistake if I and my military counterparts from the United States just go back and we focus on, okay, how many more advisors here and what kind of armored personnel carriers there. I think the real question is, what are the political arrangements that are needed? What kind of economic investments are needed? And we brought with us the head of USAID, which is our development agency, to think through precisely that question, particularly on education and health. Are there things in the north that we can contribute?
You have been in the ground in the far north region of the country, which is the most affected part of Cameroon vis-a-vis Boko Haram. And as I speak to you, I got information from top Cameroonian military officials, and that is yet to be confirmed by the government, that a senior military official died in an operation by landmines. And during your visit in the far north, there was an incident in which a young Cameroonian died. What actually happened?
Well, the two incidents are very different. One is the threat of Boko Haram manifested here, where even a senior officer who's armed, presumably, and probably in some kind of secure vehicle, is able to be killed by an explosive device. And one of the reasons we are here is to look at what more we can do to offer counter-explosive training so incidents like that don't happen. And we express our condolences to the family of this officer. In terms of the incident that we were involved in, my entire delegation is, suffice it to say, totally heartbroken by what happened. We were driving along in order to get to a meeting with displaced persons in the northern part of the country. We were following our Cameroonian lead, and the roads were closed to individuals and to vehicles. There was no traffic or anything. And suddenly, although I was toward the front of the convoy, but suddenly toward the back of the convoy or behind me, I learned later, a young boy darted out onto the road and was hit by one of the vehicles in the convoy. And the boy died soon thereafter. We had an ambulance who was part of the convoy who stopped and tried to help him, but the vehicles were progressing north, and we collectively, Cameroonians, UN, and we were not able to save this young boy. And I mean, it's the worst thing that could possibly happen for the family of this boy, for the boy. I met the boy's little brother as well as his parents. And of course, we're stricken by this, and we extend our deepest sympathy to the family that will be grieving for the rest of their lives.
Away from such incidents which have to do with Boko Haram, let's talk environmental protection. A while ago, you held a destruction ceremony of some ivory. A few days ago, we saw Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta performing a similar exercise in Kenya alongside other African leaders and top American stars. When an ambassador of the United States of America travels from New York, where our office is found, to the UN, to attend a destruction of an ivory in Yaoundé, Cameroon, what is the message you intend to send across?
Well, our message is that ivory has value when it is on an elephant. And ivory that is trafficked, ivory that is poached, ivory that is obtained by killing, innocent Cameroonians who are trying to protect their national heritage, has no value. And I think that's why you're seeing more and more of these destruction ceremonies, whether ivory crushes or ivory burns like the one we got to witness today. And this message is really important. I will say, though, that I also very much appreciate, as does President Obama, that our responsibilities do not simply extend to coming and supporting your ivory burn. We've got to deal with the demand in our country because it's not, by and large, it's not Cameroonian homes that are the homes in which precious ivory ends up. And Cameroon is the place that is raided and pillaged for the benefit of often wealthy people in my country, in China, elsewhere in the world. So we know that we need to crack down in terms of law enforcement, and we want to support Cameroon even more than we have to date with training for your patrols and for your eco guards, as they're called. But our laws and our regulations and enforcement of them is also going to be needed so that the demand dries up.
Let's take the last two questions. You'll be traveling to Chad, to Nigeria to meet the leaders of these countries. And let me make a particular stopover in Nigeria in particular. During the Goodluck administration, there was a lot of tension between Abuja and Washington, especially when it comes to the sale of lethal weapons to effectively combat Boko Haram. Buhari has come in and is more open and says that we cannot tolerate Boko Haram. Will you now sell more complicated weapons to the Nigerian administration, which is more committed now?
Well, let me just challenge a little bit one of your premises, because I think it wasn't a question of us choosing human rights over security. we don't believe you can advance security when your security forces are killing civilians in the way that was happening. And so we have laws in our country that when units are involved in those kinds of systematic violations of human rights, it's not possible for us to do the kind of equipping and training that we would otherwise like to do, particularly given the horror of Boko Haram. I mean, really an almost unrivaled horror that is inflicting such pain on the Nigerian people, now the Cameroonian people as well. So yes is the short answer. We are now in a situation where President Buhari and we have sat down and we've talked about what the security forces are going to need in order to effectively prosecute the fight. He has said he also agrees with us that there is no successful fight against Boko Haram
Madam Ambassador,
without attention to human rights.
The media reaction was that there was a kind of ping-pong and feet-dragging between the Nigerian mission to the United Nations, where you sit at the Security Council in particular to handle discussions with your Russian counterpart, Vitaly Chokin, and others. Do you have the impression that the Nigerian ambassador to the UN now, where you guys sit together, is more collaborative? Is that the sense you have now?
I think what's important is that President Buhari has made a commitment to the northeastern part of the country, both to defeating Boko Haram, but also to the central premise that we all need to embrace, which is there will be no defeat unless you deal with the political and the economic issues that have plagued that region for too long. And Cameroon deals with a similar challenge in the northern part of the country in terms of underdevelopment. So I think if all of us come together and we embrace not only the military side and providing the kind of equipment that these forces need, making sure that units are so-called clean units that have not been involved in gross violations of human rights, investigating allegations when they are credible, and holding accountable anybody who's involved in gross violations of human rights, and then bringing the other parts of the stool. The stool is military, political, and economic. And if you have only one leg of the stool's going to fall over. If you have two legs of the stool, you're going to be falling over at some point. We need all three legs, and I think now we have a shared understanding of that.
Okay, Madam, finally, I know that you have a very difficult timetable. You sit in the Situation Room during Principal's meeting, a kind of cobra for the British at the White House with President Barack Obama. When you sit and talk Boko Haram, you sit and you talk Islamic State, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and Al-Shabaab. What is the countenance of President Barack Obama in such meetings?
Angry. That there could be a movement that bills itself as standing for something and builds nothing, just destroys lives. Boko Haram has killed maybe 20,000 people in this region. Why? Why do they have to kill those children? Why do they have to take those parents away from those kids who will now grow up without parents, or the rest of their lives wonder if their parents are alive somewhere? So that's the dynamic, and then it's a roll up your sleeves. All right, we can't admire the problem here. We've got to figure out what are the concrete steps we're going to take that is going to allow us to more expeditiously defeat this group. We're in a hurry. President Obama is no longer president after January 20th, 2017, though I know a lot of Africans would like us to end term limits so that Barack Obama could stay from,
Africans
not you.
are increasingly becoming very hostile to long mandates.
That's true, that's
true.
But I've heard there might be a Barack Obama exception. Maybe not. There shouldn't be an exception.
Okay,
there should never be an exception.
Sure.
But my point is, we want to hand the keys over to the next administration with Boko Haram dramatically weakened even from where they are today. We've made some progress, I think, in the last 6 to 9 months, but that progress needs to accelerate as we get to the end of our administration.
The permanent representative of the United States of America to the United Nations organizations in New York, Ambassador Samantha Power-Jane, thanks very much indeed for being guest on GlobeWatch.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I just want to inquire from you, of recent, there has been relative peace in Israel. What accounts for the relative calm back home?
The Palestinians realized that the best way to go ahead with peaceful life is through negotiation and cooperation with Israel. Unfortunately, we see the leadership of the Palestinian Authority in West Bank try to go by unilateral steps in different international organizations, and Hamas in Gaza continue to prepare its way to attack Israel in the coming future by rockets and by attacking tunnels that go under the border into the Israeli villages and kibbutzes.
You just spoke of attacks. The traditional methods of violence between Israeli and Palestinians has always been the use of firing rockets, has been gun exchanges. But this time, about 8 months ago, you people went to the technique of using machetes, knives to kill each other. Is that the newest technology to bring the other side on guards?
First of all, it was many years ago already we had a lot of knives attacks, but it's true that this time it's a new phenomenon that we see a lot of young Palestinians going and attack by knives or by scissors, but sometimes they use also guns, and they use rockets to rocks. They throw rocks on cars that cause deaths of people. And the difference now that this is a minor group among youth, but the majority of the people that we see, they want to live in peace, they want to improve their life conditions, and we see that even in Gaza, people understand that Israel is not the cause of the problem, but Hamas, and the bad relationship between Gaza and West Bank, controlled by Palestinian Authority. It has nothing to do with Israel. Israel approved all the measures that they asked to start to rehabilitate Gaza Strip, and we allow them to bring a lot of materials to build their new houses.
During the last speech of your Prime Minister to the United Nations General Assembly in New York, instead of delivering his speech, he paused for 45 seconds or 40 seconds roughly. In diplomacy, what was the meaning of that silence? Because I can realize that he doesn't talk too much again.
It's, this speech was, the silence is about emphasize the message, but right now we moved ahead already. Right now his new message is to the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, to come and negotiate with him, and he told him that he can free all of his schedule.
Kawala.
I do not want a Monique
Kawala.
Matekel, another one.
Kawala.
I want
These are people.
to
These are
be
people.
able
These
to live
these
well
are
in my
people.
country.
These are people you have trained. Their local leaders. When you say those who are governing you, these are people you have equally trained their local leaders. Over 5,000 of them over the 10 years. This is information available on your official website. And there is a belief in educational sciences that when you have 10 candidates in an exam as a teacher and 9 of them fail, 1 pass, the teacher is equally a failure. You are part of the failure.
Absolutely not. One is that we're not talking about students in an exam. We're talking about mayors who attended one seminar. That one seminar does not determine their success or failure as a mayor.
Final thought. Somebody wrote online before I came to interview for me to put this question to you that you only make noise when elections are around. Why that choice?
I think that question, first of all, the person who asked it is a person who is not doing their homework. And I assume if you are transmitting it, then I wonder whether you are doing your homework. Because the CPP is one of the parties that is constantly on the field. In the last election was in 2011. Since 2011, we have worked on the case of stolen children. We have worked on the case of people whose homes are being broken by the state. We have worked on the case of young people and employment. We have worked on so many cases, healthcare in Cameroon. We are one of the rare parties that is constantly on the ground.